So this is my 75th anniversary edition of The Hobbit. It's very important to note this is not a facsimile of the first edition. This is the revised edition that Tolkien released whilst he was working on The Lord of the Rings, where he redid the Riddles in the Dark chapter to make it fit more in line with Lord of the Rings. So this is still the one that most people have read. The first edition is very difficult to get hold of. I probably will get a facsimile edition at some point, but until then, this is one of my favorite editions. As you can see, the cover is the same cover that Tolkien designed for the first edition, with some differences to the one that was actually released. This is his original design with the red sun and the red dragon over there. When the first edition was released, that was white, and so is that because the publisher didn't want to do the cost of the red on the cover. Also, the greens and blues on the first edition are a bit different as well. I quite like the color like this. It seems almost like a watercolor painting. It's a bit nice. We've got black binding underneath. It's not sewn binding, which actually surprised me. It is glued binding. I would have preferred if it was sewn. It's fine. You've got the usual Tolkien logo. For the end papers, the front, you've got Thror's map with the hidden runes, which are not hidden on this version, with the black and red ink as originally published. And on the back, you've got the map of the Wilderland, which was also originally published in black and red ink, but this one has like black and blue ink. I don't know if you can see it very well on the camera. The blue ink looks black as well, but it is blue. An interesting little factoid, these lines on the edge of the map, which are incorporated as a sort of boundary, is actually because Tolkien drew his maps on graph paper, and that is the margin that was on the graph paper. Also in the 75th anniversary, we've got these lovely colour plates of Tolkien's original colour illustrations for The Hobbit. It also includes the usual black and white illustrations. The Hobbit is one of my favourite books. I think I first read it when I was about 9 or 10. One of the first fantasies I ever read. I think the first fantasy I ever read was Chronicles of Narnia, but I didn't even read that in order. I ended up reading Prince Caspian before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is a very weird order to read that in. But there's something about The Hobbit that captured my imagination, and it was many, many years later when I realized there was a follow-up to The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings. Well, not many, many years. I think maybe I read The Lord of the Rings when I was about 12 or 13. So it was not many, many years, but it was quite a few years later, and I found The Lord of the Rings and was flabbergasted that this was a continuation of The Hobbit, but in a much more mature way. That means that I was completely enthralled with Middle-earth, with the elves and the dwarves, and of course the hobbits. There's just something about the way it's written. It's written in that tone of voice which a lot of children books are written, where it's not quite talking down, but it's almost like it's trying to just explain things a lot. But then you've got this background history to The Hobbit that I've not found in any other children's books at the time, where there's a deepness to the history of the world they're in. They go to a place, they find some treasure, and in that treasure are swords which they say are made in the lost city of Gondolin. But what is the lost city of Gondolin? It's an elvish city. We know that. They're elvish swords. They glow blue when there's goblins nearby. And there's sort of this feeling like, oh, this almost feels like a sequel to something that never happened. And that sort of deepness in history, I think, is what captures a lot of people's imagination with Middle-earth. Of course, it's only much later that we find out that Tolkien had written his whole legendarium as the Silmarillion, or the Book of Lost Tales, and that the Hobbit was sort of set within that legendarium, which he didn't intend to at first. But I'll get more into that when we go on to the Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings and various others. But this was my introduction to Middle-earth, as it was many other people's. And there's a reason why this has probably never been out of print, and why it is still one of the best-selling books today. It's definitely one of my favorites.